Hey Panthers, I miss you. This week in grammar, we're going to be talking about point of view. So make sure you've got your remote learning book and a pen or pencil as you follow along in this guided lesson.
So this is going to be topic 4, which is going to be in your packet 2 for English. I think it's on page 89 if you're actually looking at physical pages, but it does say on the bottom right hand corner, the beginning of this lesson is on page 161 in orange. So if you're looking at the orange part of the lesson, which unfortunately I cut off the bottom, but it says 161 right on the bottom here. And at the top, it's lesson 17, explaining point of view. So make sure that you're here with me. Reminder that you can always pause and play the video at your need or at your leisure. So if you need a little bit more time to understand something or a little bit more time to write something down, just pause the video and then play it back at your convenience. So on that note, let's get into point of view. This says, have you ever had two friends tell you about the same event but hear two very different stories? That's because each one told you how the event looked from his or her point of view or perspective. When you read a story or poem, you get a point of view too. Sometimes it's the point of view of the author, but often it's the point of view of the narrator or speaker, the voice that tells us the story. At other times, you might even experience the events through the eyes of one or more of the characters. So let's look at this picture right here on this page. And how would somebody describe the point of view from the boy, and how would that look different than if you were looking through the point of view at this woman? So I can see that this boy, and looking at the details in my chart, it says he's leaning up against the tree and he looks like he's taking a nap. So he's pretty leisure. He doesn't really care that much about, it looks like he's supposed to be painting maybe, but that doesn't seem that important. He's just taking a nap. And we can see over here that from his point of view, he's peaceful and content. And it's just a nice, lazy, lovely day that he's enjoying. Now let's look at the same picture in the same scenario, but from this woman's point of view right here. And you can see she's got her hands on her hips, and if you look closely at her face, she looks pretty mad. And we can see that from her point of view, looking at the boy, she looks pretty angry because he is taking a nap under a tree instead of painting with this brush. I'm unsure what he's supposed to be painting. And then it says, the two characters in the illustration above are having two very different experiences. This results in two very different points of view about the same situation. The boy in the picture might not care that he's not working, but that lady definitely does care. And the reason why we talk about point of view is that understanding that how an event is described is directly 100% affected by who told you the story or who's describing the story. So events can really be swayed or biased towards whoever you're hearing it from. So if you as a reader are always thinking about who exactly is telling me this story, it really helps you understand their attitudes and feelings and their beliefs. So we're going to be moving on into our first part of the modeled instruction. And we're going to be reading The Settlers by Rowena Jackson. And we're going to be using evidence from this text to determine the character's point of view in the story. So this is The Settlers, written by Rowena Jackson. Little Bear crept closer and closer through the tall grass until he had a better vantage point to watch the trail of wagons pass. He'd never seen white people before, though his father sometimes traded skins and bows with the men. Little Bear had heard all the warnings, but he still wanted to see what they looked like. One wagon fell behind the rest of the caravan. The rains of the past few days had turned the trail to thick mud, and the wagon's oxen were tired. They made it another few minutes before Little Bear heard a loud crack, and the back corner of the wagon crashed to the ground. Two people from the wagon inspected the broken wheel. Little Bear froze when one pulled out a rifle and fired it into the air. He crouched into a small ball in the weeds, his heart drumming in his ears. But then he saw other people running to help the stranded travelers, and he knew that the rifle shot had just been a signal. So we're going to use this question to figure out the rest of this chart. And the question that we're going to be thinking about is that the narrator describes the scene from Little Bear's point of view. What do we find out as a result about that character? What do we find out about Little Bear as we are reading a story from his perspective? So we're going to identify some words and phrases that reveal his thoughts and attitudes. I've already went ahead and underlined some important details that I think help the student or help us understand what Little Bear is feeling. So some things that I underlined were that he had never seen white people before. The narrator doesn't necessarily tell us how Little Bear feels about the white settlers. So the reason why I'm underlining is because I'm trying to find clue words in phrases that are helping me understand how Little Bear feels. So that's why I underlined he'd never seen white people before. That seems to be like a very important detail. Little Bear had heard all the warnings about those people, but he still wanted to see what they looked like. So those are some important details in that first paragraph that are helping me understand how Little Bear feels about the white settlers, even though they don't necessarily say that. So these words are telling me that he's very curious about them, but he's not quite afraid of them. And that's kind of what they've got right here written at his point of view. So we're going to take the evidence that we just underlined in the text and we're going to add that in right here. So basically we're going to say that he creeps closer and ignores the warnings. We're just kind of summarizing all of those sentences into one. And I think it's important that we say that he's very curious about these people, but he's not necessarily afraid of them at this point. So then we're going to look at the next part where they're giving us evidence from the text, and we're going to determine that the character's point of view, so how Little Bear was feeling. And this says, he freezes at the sound of the rifle. He crouches into a ball and his heart beats fast. So we have to write about what does that tell us about the character's point of view? So if we go back to this third paragraph and we think about some of those words that describe how he felt, we can say that they used the words like he froze, they used he crouched into a small ball into the weeds, his heart is drumming fast. Remembering, I'm just kind of underlining what they've already written down as my evidence that's in the text. So what does that tell us about Little Bear? It tells us that he's frightened. At this point, he is frightened of the settlers. So when we were reading in the first paragraph, he wasn't necessarily frightened, he was more curious. But as we got to that third paragraph, when we see those words, frozen, and that he crouches into a ball and his heart's beating really fast, right there, specifically, he is frightened. If you keep reading to the last sentence of the passage, doesn't necessarily, we see Little Bear get relieved and maybe not as frightened. That is true when he finds out that it was just a signal for the people in the front of the caravan. However, if I'm just looking at this, what they gave me from evidence from the text, and I just look at these two sentences, what I draw from that is that he's frightened of the settlers at that point. And then it says, on the lines below, explain how the narrator's description of Little Bear's experience influences the reader's understanding of events. So when we're writing down here, I want you guys to think about because we heard this story from Little Bear's perspective, how did that change our understanding? I think that by reading the passage from Little Bear's perspective, we were frightened at one point of the settlers. And I think that that's important that we touch on, because if we were reading this from a different perspective, say the perspective of the settlers in that back wagon, and their side of the story is, our wheels broke, we looked at them, we need to get the attention of the people in front of us, so we shot our gun to get their attention in the air. Never in that scenario would we be frightened for the settlers or frightened of the settlers. So in this case, because we're hearing it from somebody else's point of view, we get a sense of fear of the settlers. So let's move on and continue reading. It says, just then, there was a rustle in the grass beside Little Bear. He let out the long breath he'd been holding when he saw it was just his older brother, White Deer, who silently signaled that they needed to return home before the settlers spotted them. Little Bear followed, but he paused a moment to glance back. Traveling out on the open prairie was dangerous, and the settlers were just people. He hoped the pioneer family got their wagon wheel fixed soon. So let's look at this close reading, because this is going to help us identify some evidence in the text that signals what Little Bear's point of view is about the settlers at this point in the story. So it says, what is Little Bear's attitude toward the white settlers in the paragraph? Circle any clues that suggest how Little Bear feels. I'm going to underline because it's easier online. But some things that show me how he feels about the settlers in these paragraphs, what he's thinking of them as just people. Whereas his brother came to get him and say, we got to get back because this is unsafe. Little Bear's more thinking they're just people. And he was hoping that they got their wagon fixed. So let's complete the following chart by using evidence to explain Little Bear's point of view at the end of the story. So using the evidence from the text that we just underlined. And here's a little hint on the side. It says, Little Bear was curious about the white settlers and then became startled by the rifle. How does he feel now? So we watched Little Bear. In the beginning was very curious. In the middle, he became frightened. And now at the resolution of the story, how does Little Bear feel? And we underlined some things in our paragraphs that show us how Little Bear feels. So he hopes that the family fixes its wheel. So at this point, he's wishing them well. He really hopes that their wheel gets fixed and that they get to their destination safely. So now we can say that he's no longer afraid of the settlers. And I know that because if he was still afraid of the settlers, he wouldn't want them to be able to continue their journey. So we just watched this character development of him being curious to frightened to more of an understanding of the pioneers. So when we look at the last part, it says, explain how the evidence from the text helped you determine Little Bear's point of view. So basically the author revealed 3 different attitudes towards the settlers. Little Bear was curious at first, then frightened, and ended by wishing the settlers well. So that type of evidence is really helping us understand Little Bear's point of view. So now we're going to move on to our guided practice. And if you're looking at the screen up here, we're going to be reading Landing at Ellis Island by Stuart Crowley. And I've got some bonus comprehension questions up here on the screen. And I want you to think about these as I'm reading through the story the first time. And I know this is kind of a bonus and it's not in your book, but comprehension is extremely important that we're continuously working on. So as I'm reading Landing at Ellis Island, I want you to think about, where is Anya from? What country? And why is she arriving from Ellis Island? I'm sorry, why is she on a boat arriving to Ellis Island? And why is she not happy to be there? So let's read. This says Landing at Ellis Island by Stuart Crowley. And this is from the diary of Anya Bulgakov, aged 13. And this is August 24th, 1912. I'm not speaking to my parents. This afternoon, we were standing at the railing on the ship's deck, Mother and Father cheering and pointing out at the island approaching across the waves. They hugged me. I didn't hug back, and told me again how wonderful new home in America was going to be, full of opportunities. I didn't speak English, I reminded them, only Russian, and I wouldn't know any of their customs. I missed my real home. August 25th, the next day, 1912. The Ellis Island Great Hall, where we waited for 5 hours to be processed, thundered with strange voices and terrifying faces. Finally, I wedged myself under my mother's arm to escape the distant cries of a child. At last, a stern medical examiner inspected each of us. We were not marked with chalk, thank goodness. That would have been a sign that we were ill and had to be deported. Relieved, we moved on to another line. Then we came to a table where the impatient man who also spoke Russian asked us question after question. He recorded the details in his ledger, and to my great relief, we were done. September 9th, 1912. The city is a bustling and amazing place. We've rented rooms in a building with other Russian immigrants, and my new friend Katya has promised to help me learn English. Father has secured work at the printer's shop, and Mother has made my favorite shashlik and pizookie dishes for our new neighbors. New York City might just become a home for me after all. So before I get into my close reading and before I get into my study buddy who is hiding behind this blue box, I'm going to come back to these comprehension questions. And where is Anya from? They never necessarily state it, but they do say that she speaks Russian. So we can tell from that Anya is from Russia. And then it says, why is she on a boat arriving, this should say, to Ellis Island? As I read through that, we know that her family's immigrating to the United States in search of a new life full of better opportunity. And the last part says, why is Anya not happy to arrive on Ellis Island? That was in the first paragraph right here. She doesn't know the language. She only can speak Russian or the customs in America, and she misses her real home. So as we were reading through, if you did well on those comprehension questions, good for you. Next time, just making sure that we're working and recalling information. So let's look at our study buddy here. It says the story is in the form of a girl's diary, As I read, I'll underline details that'll help me understand more about her point of view. So if we look through what our study buddy has underlined, she's already talked about things that are Anya's point of view. So she's not speaking to her parents. She didn't hug them back. They told her again, and notice how it's in all caps. So that makes me think that they've told her not just once, but many times how wonderful their new home is going to be. This shows how much she misses her real home. So those are all things that are helping us understand Anya's point of view. Let's look at the close reading. How does Anya feel during her time at Ellis Island? Draw a box around any details that express or suggest her emotions. So they're asking us at Ellis Island. So that's going to be in our August 25th diary entry right here. I am going to use underlining again. It's much easier for me on the computer, but some details from this text that make me understand Anya's point of view are things like strange voices, terrifying faces, and it seems like she's trying to escape. It says she wedged herself under her mother's arm to escape. So those details are kind of showing how she feels at Ellis Island. There must have been a lot of people around and she seemed to be very frightened. And then if I look at my next close reading, it says, what is Anya's attitude toward America in the last paragraph, so the September 9th diary entry? Circle details that reveal what she thinks about her new home now. Again, I'm going to underline, but I think she said it's a bustling, which means very busy, an amazing place. And down here, she says that New York City might just become a home for her. So the fact that she's referring it to her home, and in the first paragraph, she was talking about how much she missed her real home, which was Russia. We can see how our character has developed over the course of these 3 diary entries. So we're going to be using this information to help us on our next page. Again, I can only show 1 page at a time, so make sure that you're looking back onto this page right here as we answer our multiple choice questions. And these hints over here are always super helpful. So number 1 says, at the beginning of the story, what is the narrator's point of view about immigrating to America? A, Anya is angry and upset about having to leave Russia. B, Anya is anxious about having to learn English. C, Anya is excited to be making a home in a new country. Or D, Anya is grateful that there will be new opportunities for her. So looking back at what the study buddy has already underlined for us, we can determine that the correct answer is A, that Anya's angry and upset about having to leave Russia. Paragraph 1 provides significant evidence about how she's angry. She refuses to hug her parents back, things like that. Correct, or choice B isn't right. The story doesn't ever talk about how Anya's nervous about learning English. It just states that she doesn't know English. C can't be correct, and D, because the first paragraph that they're talking about when they first are immigrating to America indicates that she is not excited about coming to America at all, and she's most certainly not interested in any of these new opportunities for her. So A is your correct choice. Looking at number 2, what text evidence supports the idea that Anya feels afraid during her day at Ellis Island? Is it A, she and her family had to wait for 5 hours to be processed? B, she was not marked with the chalk that meant she was ill? C, she says that the Great Hall was filled with terrifying faces? Or D, she describes the man who asked her questions as impatient? So looking back as to what we underlined in paragraph 2 about her feelings towards Ellis Island and how her point of view was, we can identify that the correct answer, C, that she was talking about how there were terrifying faces. That's very good evidence that shows that she's afraid. Choice A isn't right because, 5 hours is a long time, but it might be impatient, but it doesn't necessarily show that she's afraid. Choice B, that the fact that she didn't get marked with chalk meant that she was healthy, so that wouldn't be something to be afraid of. And then D is incorrect because this word impatient, it means that she doesn't really like the man, or the guy seems kind of bossy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she's afraid of him. And looking at our final part in number 3, it says, describe how Anya's attitude toward her new home changes by the end of the story. Include at least 2 details from the text that show how the author develops Anya's point of view. So in our third and final paragraph, Anya's really enjoying her new life in New York City. So I'm going to write Anya's thoughts and actions in the first 2 paragraphs show that she is fearful and angry about having to move to America. By the end of the 3rd paragraph, however, she feels hopeful about her new life. She reveals that her family is living with other Russian immigrants, and that her parents are doing well, and that she has found a new friend. She claims that New York City could be a home for her. So in that 3rd paragraph, we really see a big, giant character shift and a character development of Anya's feelings and attitudes towards moving to the United States of America from Russia. So this right here is a great video that reviews 1st and 3rd point of view, and this is going to be on the independent work page that will be on your Google Classroom. And then I've also included a small table here. And moving on to your independent work for grammar this week, you're going to be reading A Jar of Dreams, and you've got 3 multiple choice questions and 1 short response. You may submit this interactively on Google Classroom, or you may handwrite it in your packet too, and you may Snapchat it to me or email it to my email address. I look forward to seeing you all on Friday for our Skype session, and have a great rest of your week.